A Roman soldier woke before sunrise, not because an alarm told him to, but because comfort had never been offered to him as an option. By the time the sun cleared the hills, he had already marched 20 miles carrying 60 pounds of gear, built a fortified camp with his bare hands, and prepared to do it again the next day, and the day after that for years, sometimes decades, without complaint, without hesitation, without asking whether it was fair. Now ask yourself honestly, if you were stripped of your phone, your soft bed, your climate-controlled home, your endless entertainment, and placed into that world, the world of iron discipline, brutal hierarchy, and unforgiving consequence, would you survive the first month? Would you survive the first week? This is not a question meant to insult you. It is a question meant to wake something up in you, because the truth is uncomfortable. And the Romans believed discomfort was the forge where real men were made. We live in an age of extraordinary comfort, and yet an age of extraordinary fragility. Men today have more information, more resources, more opportunity than any generation in human history. And somehow many of them feel weaker, softer, more lost than ever before. Anxiety is common, purpose is rare, discipline is treated as optional. Emotional regulation is treated as something you outsource to a therapist rather than something you build yourself, day by day, through discipline and philosophy. The Romans would not recognize this version of manhood, not because they lacked compassion or depth. In fact, their philosophy, Stoicism, is one of the most emotionally intelligent systems of thought ever created, but because they understood something modern men have forgotten. That comfort, left unchecked, corrodes character, and character is the only true currency of a man's life. To understand why modern men would struggle to survive the Roman world, we first have to understand what that world actually demanded. Rome was not built by soft hands. It was built by farmers who became soldiers, soldiers who became generals, and disciplined citizens who understood that freedom was not free. It was earned through sacrifice, sweat, and self-mastery. From the earliest days of the Republic, Roman boys were raised under the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors, a code of duty, discipline, and responsibility. A boy was taught that his desires meant nothing compared to his obligations. He was taught to endure pain without complaint, to respect authority without resentment, and to place the good of Rome above his own comfort. This was not cruelty, it was preparation. The Romans understood, long before modern psychology confirmed it, that a man who has never suffered has no real strength, only untested potential. Consider the training of a Roman legionary. He did not simply learn to fight. He was broken down and rebuilt through relentless repetition. He trained with weapons twice the weight of real ones so that real combat would feel effortless by comparison. He marched under the weight of his armor and supplies for hours in blistering heat or freezing rain, because the battlefield does not wait for good weather. He learned to dig trenches after a full day of marching, exhausted, because a fortified camp could be the difference between life and death. There was no room for excuses. There was no concept of "I'm not feeling it today." The Roman military machine understood something modern men desperately need to relearn. Discipline is not motivation. Motivation is fleeting, emotional, unreliable. Discipline is a decision made once and then defended every single day regardless of how you feel. This is where the first major gap between modern men and Roman men becomes painfully clear. Today, many men wait to feel motivated before they act. They wait until they feel confident before they try. They wait until conditions are perfect before they commit. The Romans built an empire that lasted centuries because they did not wait for the right feeling. They built the right habits and let the habits carry them even when feeling was absent. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man in the ancient world, emperor of Rome, reminding himself each morning that he would encounter difficult people, frustrating circumstances, and moments of exhaustion, and that none of it mattered, because his task was simply to do the work of a human being, to act with reason, virtue, and discipline regardless of external conditions. Imagine the most powerful man on earth waking up every day to remind himself to stay disciplined, humble, and self-controlled. Now consider how many modern men with far less power and far more comfort cannot even wake up early without hitting snooze 5 times. The Stoics were not distant philosophers detached from reality. They were generals, senators, emperors, and slaves who used philosophy as a weapon for survival. Epictetus, one of the most influential Stoic teachers, was born into slavery. He endured physical abuse, including a broken leg inflicted by his master, and yet he taught that no external circumstance could break the internal freedom of a disciplined mind. His central teaching, one that modern men desperately need to hear, was this: some things are within our control and some things are not. Our judgments, our choices, our effort, our character, these are ours. Everything else, other people's opinions, external outcomes, uncontrollable circumstances, is not. A man who understands this distinction becomes almost unshakable because he stops wasting emotional energy on things beyond his power and channels all of it into the one thing he can master, himself. This brings us to a deeper truth about why modern men would struggle in ancient Rome. It is not just about physical toughness, although that would certainly be a shock to systems accustomed to elevators and food delivery apps. The deeper issue is psychological and emotional fragility. Modern life has created a strange paradox. Men are told to be strong, yet rarely taught how. They are told to be leaders, yet rarely trained in self-discipline. They are told to build success, yet flinch at the first sign of failure or criticism. In ancient Rome, failure was not something you avoided. It was something you were trained to expect, absorb, and rise from. Roman generals lost battles. Some lost entire armies. And yet the mark of a great commander was not the absence of failure, but the response to it. Take the story of Prince Fabius Maximus, a Roman general who faced Hannibal, one of history's most brilliant military minds, during the Second Punic War. After catastrophic Roman defeats, panic spread through the Republic. Public opinion demanded aggressive retaliation, quick victories, immediate emotional satisfaction. But Fabius refused to be controlled by public emotion or personal ego. He adopted a strategy of patience, discipline, and calculated restraint, avoiding direct confrontation, wearing down Hannibal's forces through logistics and endurance rather than emotional reaction. He was mocked, criticized, even called a coward by his own countrymen. Yet his discipline, his refusal to let public pressure dictate his decisions, ultimately helped save Rome. This is emotional mastery under extreme pressure, the ability to endure criticism, silence the need for external validation, and stay committed to a long-term strategy despite short-term pain. How many modern men can say the same when faced with criticism on social media, let alone the fate of an empire? This is the core of Stoic leadership psychology, and it is precisely what most modern men lack: the ability to separate emotional impulse from strategic action, the ability to endure discomfort without needing instant relief, the ability to accept criticism without collapsing into self-doubt or explosive defensiveness. Seneca, another towering Stoic philosopher and advisor to emperors, wrote extensively about the danger of being ruled by emotion rather than reason. He taught that anger, in particular, was a form of temporary madness, a loss of self-control that led men to make decisions they would later regret. In a world of instant reactions, keyboard warriors, and emotional outbursts recorded for the entire internet to see, Seneca's warning feels less like ancient philosophy and more like a direct message to modern men scrolling through their phones at midnight, reacting to strangers instead of building their own lives. Now let's talk about physical resilience, because the gap here is staggering and undeniable. Roman soldiers were expected to march what is now estimated to be around 20 to 25 miles a day, fully armored, for consecutive days, sometimes weeks, while remaining combat ready. When they arrived at a new location, exhausted from marching, they did not rest. They built an entire fortified camp, complete with trenches, ramparts, and defensive structures every single night, only to tear it down and do it again the next day. This was not for show. This was survival infrastructure, built through pure discipline and collective effort. Compare this to modern men who consider a rest day mandatory after a single moderately hard workout, who complain about mild inconvenience, who treat minor physical discomfort as an emergency rather than an opportunity to build resilience. The Roman relationship with physical hardship reveals something profound about character formation. They did not see suffering as something to avoid at all costs. They saw it as the primary mechanism through which strength, discipline, and virtue were forged. This philosophy extended beyond the battlefield into everyday Roman life. Cold baths, simple food, physical labor, these were not signs of poverty among disciplined Romans, especially those influenced by Stoic thought. They were deliberate practices used to build resilience and prevent the corrosive effects of luxury. Seneca himself, despite his wealth, practiced periods of voluntary simplicity, sleeping on hard surfaces, eating minimal food, wearing rough clothing, specifically to remind himself that comfort was not necessary for survival, and that a man who fears discomfort will always be a slave to circumstance. This is perhaps the sharpest contrast between the ancient Roman mindset and modern masculinity. Modern culture often equates comfort with success. Bigger house, softer bed, easier life, less friction. But the Stoics and the Roman military culture, shaped by similar values, understood that comfort without periodic hardship creates fragility, not strength. A man who has never been tested does not know what he is capable of. And worse, he does not know what he is missing. Marcus Aurelius, ruling over the most powerful empire on earth, chose to write reminders to himself about accepting hardship, controlling his temper, and remaining humble, precisely because he understood how easily power and comfort corrupt character if left unchecked by discipline and self-reflection. Let us also address something rarely discussed but critically important: the psychological weight of responsibility that defined Roman leadership. Roman generals were not distant figures issuing commands from safety. Many led from the front, sharing the same risks as their men. Julius Caesar was known to march alongside his soldiers, eat the same rations, and expose himself to the same dangers, building intense loyalty through shared hardship rather than superior comfort. This created a culture where leadership was earned through sacrifice, not simply granted through title or status. Compare this to modern leadership culture, where authority is often claimed through credentials, social media presence, or inherited privilege, rarely through demonstrated sacrifice or shared suffering. The Roman model teaches something essential. Real leadership requires real cost. If you have never sacrificed anything meaningful, you have not yet earned the right to lead. There is another layer to this conversation that goes beyond physical toughness or leadership strategy, and that is the concept of virtue itself. For the Romans, particularly those influenced by Stoic philosophy, virtue was not an abstract moral concept. It was a practical framework for living. The four cardinal virtues, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, formed the foundation of what it meant to be a man of character. Wisdom meant seeing reality clearly without self-deception or wishful thinking. Justice meant treating others fairly and fulfilling your responsibilities to your community. Courage meant acting rightly despite fear, whether that fear came from battle, criticism, or uncertainty. Temperance meant self-control, the ability to master your desires rather than being mastered by them. Now examine modern culture through this lens, honestly. Wisdom has been replaced by algorithm-fed opinions and surface-level information consumption. Justice has become tribal, often more about identity and outrage than genuine responsibility toward others. Courage has been diluted into performative statements rather than actual risk and sacrifice. And temperance, self-control, may be the most abandoned virtue of all in a world engineered specifically to hijack attention, trigger impulsive spending, and reward instant gratification over long-term discipline. The Romans built an empire on these four virtues. Modern men disconnected from this framework often struggle to build a disciplined morning routine, let alone an empire, a business, a family legacy, or a life of genuine purpose. This is not meant to shame you. It is meant to show you the exact blueprint that has been buried under centuries of comfort and convenience, quietly waiting to be reclaimed. Because here is the deeper truth hidden inside this uncomfortable comparison between modern men and Roman men. The qualities that built Rome are not lost, they are dormant. They exist in every man who chooses to wake up early instead of hitting snooze, who chooses discipline over impulse, who chooses to face criticism with calm resolve instead of emotional reaction, who chooses to build character through voluntary hardship rather than avoid all discomfort. The Roman world did not create strong men through magic or genetics. It created them through relentless environmental pressure, structured discipline, and philosophical training. Modern men do not have that external pressure forcing them to develop these traits, which means the responsibility now falls entirely on the individual man to create that pressure himself. This is precisely where Stoicism becomes not just historical curiosity, but practical modern weapon. Marcus Aurelius did not have social media, but he understood the psychological trap of seeking approval from others, warning himself repeatedly in his journal about the emptiness of chasing praise and fame. He did not have modern comfort technology, but he understood the danger of luxury eroding discipline, reminding himself to remain simple, humble, and grounded despite ruling an empire. He did not know about modern anxiety or depression by name, but he understood the psychological principle behind managing them, controlling your judgments about events rather than being controlled by the events themselves. The tools the Romans used to build mental toughness, controlling perception, embracing hardship, focusing only on what is within your control, accepting mortality as motivation rather than fear. These tools are just as effective today as they were 2,000 years ago, arguably more necessary now, given how aggressively modern environments work against natural discipline. Let's talk about death, because the Roman relationship with mortality reveals perhaps the deepest source of their mental toughness. The Stoics practiced something called memento mori, remembering that you will die. This was not meant to be morbid or depressing. It was meant to be clarifying and motivating. Marcus Aurelius frequently reflected on the brevity of life, reminding himself that emperors before him, no matter how powerful, were now dust and memory. This reflection was not used to create fear, but urgency. Urgency to live with virtue now, to stop wasting time on trivial distractions, petty conflicts, or unnecessary comfort. Because time is the one resource that cannot be reclaimed once spent. Modern men, insulated by medical advancement and comfortable living, often live as though they have unlimited time, endlessly delaying discipline, purpose, and meaningful action, until some vague future moment that may never arrive. The Romans, surrounded by constant reminders of mortality through war, disease, and hardship, developed an urgency toward living virtuously and purposefully that modern comfort has quietly erased. So when we ask whether modern men would survive the Roman Empire, we are really asking a much deeper question. Could modern men survive without their comfort, without their distractions, without instant gratification, without external validation, without the safety net of endless second chances? Could they endure physical hardship without complaint? Could they face criticism, failure, and uncertainty with the calm, disciplined resolve of a Stoic philosopher general? Could they lead others through sacrifice rather than status? Could they build unshakable character through voluntary discomfort rather than waiting for hardship to be forced upon them? For many men today, the honest answer is uncomfortable. But this discomfort itself is exactly where transformation begins, because awareness of weakness is the first step toward strength. And the Romans, along with their Stoic philosophers, believed deeply in the human capacity for change through disciplined effort. This is not a call to abandon modern life or reject technology and progress. It is a call to reclaim the internal architecture that built one of history's greatest civilizations and apply it deliberately within modern circumstances. It means choosing discomfort on purpose, cold showers, physical training, difficult conversations, early mornings, not because life demands it, but because character requires it. It means practicing emotional control deliberately, pausing before reacting, choosing calm, strategic response over impulsive emotional outbursts, especially in moments of criticism or conflict. It means taking full responsibility for your circumstances, refusing to blame external conditions, and focusing entirely on what is within your control, your effort, your discipline, your character, your response. It means studying virtue not as abstract philosophy, but as daily practice. Asking each morning, as Marcus Aurelius did, what tasks require courage today? What temptations require restraint? What responsibilities require wisdom and justice? The Roman Empire did not last because its men were comfortable. It lasted because generation after generation of disciplined men built systems, virtues, and institutions strong enough to withstand internal weakness and external threat. And when Rome eventually did decline, historians point to many causes, but among the most significant was a gradual erosion of the very discipline, civic virtue, and personal responsibility that built it in the first place. Comfort crept in. Discipline eroded. Leadership became about privilege rather than sacrifice. Sound familiar? The lesson embedded in this history is not simply about surviving ancient battlefields. It is a warning about what happens to any civilization, any man, any life. When comfort is allowed to replace discipline, when convenience replaces character, and when emotional impulse replaces philosophical self-mastery. The question is not truly whether you would survive marching 20 miles in Roman armor, though that alone would break most modern men within days. The deeper question is whether you would survive the internal battle the Romans trained for constantly, the daily war against your own weakness, your own excuses, your own comfort-seeking impulses, your own emotional volatility. Because that internal battlefield still exists today, right now, inside every man reading or listening to these words. The armor has changed, the weapons have changed, but the war for self-mastery remains exactly the same as it was 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that waking up in the morning, he should think, I am rising to do the work of a human being. Why then am I annoyed at going to do what I was made for? This is not weakness disguised as philosophy. This is one of the most powerful men in human history, choosing discipline over comfort, purpose over convenience, responsibility over excuse. Every single morning, for decades, while ruling an empire under constant threat and pressure, if he could summon that discipline while carrying the weight of Rome on his shoulders, the modern excuse of being too tired, too busy, too stressed, or too unmotivated starts to feel remarkably small in comparison. So here is the final truth, hidden within this uncomfortable question of survival. Modern men would not survive ancient Rome, not because they lack potential, but because that potential has been left dormant, untested, and undisciplined by a culture engineered for comfort rather than character. But potential dormant is not potential lost. Every principle that built Roman resilience, discipline chosen daily regardless of motivation, emotional control practiced under pressure, virtue pursued as a discipline rather than an accident, responsibility taken fully rather than deflected, hardship embraced rather than avoided, is available to you right now, today, without needing a Roman legion, an ancient battlefield, or ancient armor. The battlefield has simply moved inward, into your habits, your reactions, your discipline, and your daily choices. The Romans built an empire by forging men through hardship, philosophy, and unshakable discipline. The question this leaves you with is simple, and it deserves an honest answer, not a comfortable one. If your comfort was stripped away tomorrow, if you were forced to rely purely on your discipline, your character, your self-control, and your resilience, would you rise like a Roman general, or would you crumble like a man who has never truly been tested? The Stoics believe the answer to that question is not fixed, it is built, one disciplined choice at a time, starting today, in exactly the ordinary moment you are in right now. So choose wisely, act with virtue, master yourself before circumstance forces you to. And if this challenged you the way it should, say so in the comments. Because the first step toward becoming the kind of man Rome would have respected is admitting, honestly, where you stand right now.